I've had the same amount of vision since birth, so it's normal to me. Like it is what it is, and I've just adapted from a super young age. And so, people will ask me questions like, what's the most challenging thing, or like, what do you miss the most, and things like that. And it's like, well, I've had the same amount of vision since birth, so it's my norm.
Hey there, podcast listener. If this is your first time here, welcome to the Eat Half, Walk Double podcast, coming to you from the Ascend Endurance Coaching Studios here in lovely Stratford, New Hampshire, US of A. I'm your host, Chris Dunn. If you follow the show, well, thank you and welcome back. So this show chronicles my 4 decades in endurance sports as an exercise physiologist, coach, race director, and athlete, told through the stories of the important, influential, and interesting people I've met along the way. While I catch up with friends, colleagues, rivals, clients, and the occasional family member, it's my hope you'll learn a little something about health, fitness, and the secrets to living well along the way. Jessie Laurie and Steve Waterman are my guests this week. It's been said to be inspired is to listen to the whispers of the heart. Truth be told, all great achievements can trace their origins back to inspiration. And whether they intentionally set out to do it or not, their story has been and likely will be an inspiration to others. Jessie is a blind athlete. Steve is her guide. Together they alpine ski, rock climb, and compete in triathlon. Jessie was raised without limitation or barriers, free to explore the natural world in her own way. Her boundless spirit is a wonderful match for Steve, as he too enjoys adventure. To watch them together is to understand the true meaning of trust. Well, here they are, Jessie Laurie and Steve Waterman. Jessie and Steve, welcome to the show.
Thanks. Yes. We're excited to be here.
Thank you.
Jessie, I have it on very good authority that you have one of the most loyal, most handsome, smartest guides around.
Are you talking about Steve or my dog?
How is Elwood, by the way?
He's great. He's fast asleep in his bed. Steve actually took him for a run before the podcast, so he's sleeping.
Well, I appreciate you asking me for clarification, because you actually probably do have several loyal, handsome, smart guides, and we'll get into that. In fact, we're going to talk about Elwood a little bit more later. So stay tuned to that. So I once read that to be inspired is to listen to the whispers of the heart. If you dig in deep enough into Merriam-Webster's definition of inspiration, you'll find this definition. It's actually listed fourth, and it goes something like this: inspiration is a divine influence or action on a person believed to qualify him or her to receive and communicate a sacred revelation. In other words, to be inspired is to have your purpose to humanity revealed. Now,
sounds about right.
Yeah, and I want to get your take on that, but let me give you a little bit more of my understanding of what inspiration is, and we'll kind of sort of tie this all together here in just a moment. So for me, there are three parts to inspiration. There's something called evocation. And evocation is the idea that inspiration is created spontaneously and without intent. Transcendence is the notion that inspiration comes to us in moments of clarity and with the awareness of new possibilities. And then something called approach motivation, which is a fancy way of saying that the person with the inspiration seeks to communicate that vision either by talking about it, creating it, or letting others share in it. and I say all that to say this, that I believe that your collective story, the two of you, is inspirational. My question, my opening question, well, actually my second question, aside from the Elwood question, was is this. Jessie, who or what inspires you?
I thought about this ahead of time, knowing that the podcast was going to be about inspiration. And I don't know that I have specific people, because I think that changes depending on my goals, my athletic pursuits, my professional just goals in life in general. And so I think what inspires me is when someone does something epic, like when they do something really cool or, kind of out there that you don't see all the time. Not just like your ordinary day-to-day stuff, but, if someone hikes a really big mountain or, crushes the 4,000 footers or does an Ironman or does an ultra, things like that.
Now, I mean, generally speaking, Jessie, do you follow celebrity type athletes, or can you find, and do you find inspiration in the stories of ordinary people doing extraordinary things?
No, in fact, I am totally out of the loop on celebrity athletes. Some people will mention like, oh, did you hear so-and-so like PR'd? And I'm like, who is that? Like, should I know who that is? And so I think it's the ordinary people that do extraordinary stuff. And so like the moms that are crushing things, the single dads that are crushing things, the, young athletes or older athletes, like just ordinary people that do cool stuff.
Yeah. And Steve, what about you? Who or what inspires you?
I don't know as if I really have an answer on who. I don't think I have one specific person. I guess it was just I started doing things and I just kind of kept going with it. I didn't really have anyone that inspired me, I guess. I don't know as if I did.
I mean, like Jessie, and like myself, and we we're the three of us are connected to a pretty robust and diverse athletic community. To Jessie's point, who are out there, doing some really cool things.
Yeah.
I
guess I'd be following in what she said. It's people that do. I mean, you hear through Facebook and through friends of, so and so did this, they PR'd this, they broke they did the wombat, on and on. There's just.
I also feel like I get inspired too, like when we hear one of our friends say like, oh, I just did this race and it was really cool, and it's like, oh, that sounds awesome, like I'm gonna look it up. Like I saw on Facebook the other day somebody did a marathon in Jekyll Island, Georgia, and Steve's mom is there for the winter, and I'm like, oh my gosh, who knew? Now I want to do it.
Yeah, well, I mean, for me in the profession that I'm in, as both a race director and a professional endurance coach, I mean, I'm fortunate I get the opportunity to meet and interact with a lot of people.
Oh yeah.
Most of the stuff that the people that I know that they're doing, I would never do. But nevertheless, I mean, I'm sure it has happened, and I wonder if this is the case for the two of you, that someone in your network talks about this race that they did. They did this race called Seven Sisters. Now, what is Seven Sisters? Is it actually Seven Sisters, or what did this? Who are the Seven Sisters, and why is everybody doing this race called Seven Sisters? And it very likely for me that for instance, a race like Seven Sisters was inspired I was inspired to do it by hearing stories of other people doing it.
Yeah,
Now,
exactly.
turns out it was a big mistake, because it was probably one of the most difficult trail races I have ever done. But have either of you had a similar experience of hearing about an event and from friends or within your network, and after hearing about it, you end up doing it yourself?
Well, I got inspired. I'm sorry. I got inspired for triathlons by a running group that I was a part of. And so I started back running after college. And, once I moved back to New Hampshire, I found a network of runners, and we were on a run, and they kept talking about triathlons. And in one part of my head, I'm like, wow, these people sound insane. And then in the other part, I'm like, this sounds so cool. Like, right. I want to know more about triathlon. And then I signed up actually for my first triathlon. I only knew how to doggy paddle, but I signed up for my first triathlon anyway. And so I was definitely inspired by them just talking about their experiences and their love for triathlon. And so, I got inspired.
Yeah. Steve, I know you've done Seven Sisters. Were you inspired to do Seven Sisters by the stories of friends who'd done it?
I was going to say my son did Seven Sisters, I think 2 years or at least once before, I did it. And he kind of, I guess he would be an inspiration in that sense. Yeah. He was doing bigger races, and it was something that I kind of became interested in.
Yeah, and I guess the long and the short of it when it comes to inspiration, and why I think this particular podcast episode is so important, in that whether we intend to be inspirations for other people or not, we don't really have much control over that, through our actions and how we lead our lives. There is the potential that we can inspire other people, just not because we're actively attempting to do it, but just through the things that we do and the ways that we do them. So
don't even realize you're doing it.
Yeah, well, that's kind of I guess that's sort of my point. Well, for the listener who doesn't know either of you, why don't you introduce yourselves? Who you are, where you're from, what you do. Jessie, why don't you go first?
Okay. So I'm Jessie Laurie. I was born and raised in Springfield, New Hampshire, which is a really small town, not too far from Concord, and kind of between Concord and Lebanon would be the major cities, I guess. And was raised in what would be considered a typical family, mom, dad, sister. We owned a lot of animals: dogs, horses, pigs, chickens, cats. And so I was always outside and active as a kid. And like most kids, I decided I was sick of that, and I wanted a change of pace once I graduated high school. So I went off to Providence College in Providence, Rhode Island for my bachelor's, then went to Worcester, Mass to Assumption College for my master's, and then went, what the heck am I doing? Why am I in a city? I want to go home. And so I came back to New Hampshire and now live close to my family, and work full time and pursue a ton of different activities. So I'm a triathlete, horseback rider, rock climber, skier, both cross country and downhill. Steve last year got me into ice climbing, and really any sort of adventurous thing I can get my hands on. And as mentioned earlier in the podcast, Elwood's my guide dog, so I've been blind since birth.
And I want to get into all of those topics much deeper. Just quick follow-up question, Jessie, if you don't mind sharing. You don't necessarily have to mention who you work for if you don't want to, but what do you do professionally?
So I work for the state of New Hampshire, actually, as a vocational rehabilitation counselor. And so I carry a caseload of blind and vision impaired folks and help them to pursue their dreams and goals, basically. So Voc Rehab, you have to have a job goal as your end goal. So my job is getting people to work, but that can encompass a lot of skills ahead of time. So, helping people learn how to travel safely as a blind person, helping them have confidence in cooking and cleaning and living independently, giving people the confidence to interview well, everything that comes before getting a job that most people don't even think about. But for a lot of people who either lose their vision later in life, like, mid-adult, that's a huge change in lifestyle for them. And so, helping them get back up to
adapt.
Yeah, helping them adapt and, get back up to where they want to be. And I carry a good amount of teenagers on my caseload, teenagers and young adults, and they're fun. That's a fun group.
That all look up to her adventures.
That's a fun group.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you for that. Steve, same question. Why don't you introduce yourself?
I'm Steve Waterman, born in Ohio, actually, moved to Massachusetts at an early age. And we had a camp in northern Maine. We actually still have it. And kind of grew up there in the summers doing outdoor stuff, fishing, swimming, lots and lots of swimming, biking, just hanging out, which was a fantastic childhood. Construction is what I do now, and I've done since out of high school. I didn't really play many sports in high school. I was in a pretty big high school. So you tried out for your sports teams, and I just wasn't that good at like basketball, soccer, which I played both. But then I kind of got out of it. My daughters, I had a son, obviously, he's the seven sisters. But then I've also got three daughters. I ended up raising them alone since they were very young. And I didn't have much time to do much of anything. I put them into all the sports that I could. I had a middle daughter, Erica, that played lots and lots of basketball. My oldest was soccer, and my youngest was volleyball. So it was just devoting a lot of time to that. But once they graduated and went through various colleges, UNH, Springfield College in Mass, it was kind of my turn to start playing. So that's when I started getting into the running. And yes. I don't know where that came from. Besides Shane, I guess that would have been the inspiration for running.
Yeah.
My son, Shane.
Yeah. So you're sort of a late bloomer.
A late bloomer, yeah.
as it relates to athletics and
athletics, yeah. I mean,
and that's somewhat of an understatement based on based on some of the pretty cool stuff that you two are doing athletically. Which is what I want to talk about.
Started with the running, I got into the mountain climbing, and then kind of took it from there. And and then I met her. And then it took off.
Well, yes, the story continues to evolve. Jessie, I was fortunate to meet you through Steve. I mean, you and I have known of each other. I don't know that I had the opportunity to actually meet you in person until just very recently. We were at a friend's wedding. And right. And that's when I actually had the opportunity to meet you, Jessie. Steve, you and I have known each other a little bit longer.
Yeah.
And as I'm one of the neat things about this podcast is it gives me an opportunity to remember the stories of how I came to know folks like yourself. And so as I was thinking about it, Steve, I was thinking, my sense was that you and I came to know each other through a set of mutual friends, probably Lakes region friends, that network of people. But it also could have been at a Winter Wild. I know you did Winter Wild for a while.
Yeah.
I mean, do you remember the story, Steve, of how you and I came to know each other?
Vaguely. I'll let you tell it.
Well, I was actually counting on you to tell it because I was thinking, geez,
through Acidotic, through Jim Boole, Patty
yeah.
Higgins, a lot of the Acidotic people.
Okay.
We got to know each other.
Okay.
Through that in different races, and that I can now thinking back. I remember doing the Mountain Goat series, and to this day, I can still remember I was at the Fells race at
the Bretton Woods Fells race.
Yeah, and I got my Mountain Goat T-shirt, and that had to have been one of the proudest moments of my life. I'm serious. I got the shirt, and I was just like, "This is it."
This is pretty really cool. That was probably 2016, 2017.
I want to say it was maybe 18, 2018.
Maybe it could have been 2018. Yeah, in that ballpark.
Was a true inspiration, but I mean, we had met before that.
Yeah. So I guess the long and the short of it is through the running communities, And,
yes.
And
Mountain race.
And Jessie, when I looked at our mutual friends that we share on social media, all of them are somehow connected to the endurance community here.
That does not surprise me.
Yeah, I know, right? In the read. Well, I mean, in fact, probably the majority of my social media network is somehow connected in one way, shape, or form to the endurance racing communities. So, Jessie, I want to get into your story a little bit more. So, triathlon, downhill skiing, Nordic skiing, horseback riding, hiking, rock climbing. Is there anything that you don't do?
Well,
sit still.
Yeah, sit still. Steve is trying to talk me into skydiving, and I'm a little hesitant on that one.
Well, funny because I mentioned social media, so I as part of my show prep, oftentimes I head over to people's social media accounts and just to get an idea of some of the things that they've done. Well, sure enough, as I was scrolling through Steve's picture, there are photos from some time back.
Yeah. That was my youngest daughter's birthday. Was one of them, and you
went skydiving is what I was.
A couple other times I've been. But.
Yeah. Okay, so you haven't been skydiving yet, Jessie. I guess that's one thing that you
not yet.
You have yet to check off your list. Jessie, I think an important part of your story is your blindness, and I'm wondering if you would share with myself and the listener a little bit more of that. You mentioned since childhood since you were very, very young. Can you talk a little bit more about that? What the condition is and how that's evolved?
Yeah, so I have what's called Leber's congenital amaurosa, and it impacts my retina and then the nerves going from my retina back to my brain. And so I can see some things, but not great. Like when I talk to my guides, I say, pretend like I can't see anything just in case I miss something. But typically I can see like shapes, shadows, peripheral is better than central for sure. Sometimes my depth perception is a little off, but like I'll know that there's a step, but sometimes I'm not sure if it's like, a foot down or 5 feet down. Right. Yeah. And then it's weather, like lighting plays a big role. So a lot of people make the assumption, oh, it must be really nice when it's really sunny and bright out. And it's like, no, it's really nice when it's cloudy, even though I miss the sun. Cloudy days are my good vision days just because there's no shadows and sun in my eyes. Right, and so I can read large print, like if it's big enough, like on cereal boxes or something like that. But I can't read print effectively enough to like I'm not fast enough at reading print to make it efficient. And so I know how to read Braille. And I also use a lot of auditory. Like I have a screen reader on my computer, and then the iPhone has built-in accessibility features. So I use VoiceOver on the iPhone. But yeah, I've had the same amount of vision since birth. So it's normal to me. Like it is what it is. And I've just adapted from a super young age. And so, people will ask me questions like, what's the most challenging thing? Or like, what do you miss the most? And things like that. And it's like, well, I've had the same amount of vision since birth. So it's my norm. And so, sometimes like, I don't know any different.
Right.
And I got my first guide dog when I was 17. So I was a senior in high school. I knew from a really young age that I wanted to work dogs as opposed to using a cane to travel. And so got my first one at 17, and he's number 3.
Yeah. What was your childhood like? I mean, actually, do you have brothers and sisters?
I have a sister, an older sister, Katie.
Yeah.
She's 2.5 years older than me.
Yeah.
And we were raised very much the same. And so Katie's fully sighted, no disabilities. And her and I both were outside riding our bikes and taking care of the horses. And my parents were we're raising both our girls the same way. Definitely wasn't sheltered. Like they didn't baby us. They were super supportive in everything we wanted to do as far as athletics. Her and I both were interested in horseback riding from a young age. She played field hockey. We lived on, 5 or 6 acres. And so we were always just outside and getting dirty, and might've gotten a couple of bruises, and, it was just, right. It was just the way of life. Like
sisterly fights.
Yeah. No. And we just, we're raised like typical country kids.
Do you think that your parents' approach was an important factor for you and who you became to be and your adventurous spirit? And I mean,
for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. My parents fostered anytime I said like, I want to try downhill skiing, they were like, okay. And they started researching like, adaptive skiing programs. And, I'm only 29, but back when I was a kid, there wasn't as many programs and support for parents with blind kids. And so my mom really had to be kind of a trailblazer, my mom and my dad, as far as opportunities for me and stuff like that to keep me doing what my peers were doing. Whereas now,
most of what your peers.
Yeah. Well, like now there's so many different opportunities for youth with disabilities, particularly blindness. There's a ton of adaptive camps and stuff like that. And so there's definitely been a lot of education and programs that have developed. But when I was a kid, I was the only blind kid that I knew. And so I was skiing with sighted peers. I was horseback riding with sighted peers. I was the only blind kid in my school. Like, I don't know. That was like my normal little world, and I didn't know anything different.
Yeah. You make a really good point about, when you get the typical question of, what if some of your greatest obstacles you've overcome or some of the greatest challenges you've overcome, not knowing any different, how would you possibly put them in perspective? Your greatest challenges were probably every teenager's greatest challenge. They weren't necessarily greater for you because you were blind, because you didn't really know any different. Would you say that that's fair?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I can put myself like in someone else's shoes, and I can say like, yeah, not driving, it's a pain in the neck, but like there's workarounds for that and stuff like that. But as far as like I've gotten questions like, what do you miss? Or like kind of like a poor you attitude. And it's like, I don't know any different. Like, as far as I'm concerned, like this is normal.
Right. Yeah. No, and that makes a lot of sense. Well, of course, I want to know more about Elwood, because like you, I have a love of dogs. My dogs are not working dogs. My dogs are Labrador Retrievers, but they're not working Labrador Retrievers.
I told her about Boone and Tucker.
Yeah, Boone and Tucker. I'm not sure exactly what they're good for. Really, probably other than companionship, probably not much more.
Well,
than
they're
that.
labs, so they're the best dog.
Well, for sure. So yeah, so tell us a little bit more about Elwood.
Okay. So Elwood's like I said, my third guide dog. He comes from Guiding Eyes for the Blind in Yorktown Heights, New York. And he is going to be 7 in April. And he was actually trained as Guiding Eyes has what's called a running dog program. And so on top of a dog's normal guide work, they evaluate the dogs to see if they have an interest in running. And they only take the dogs that show a real interest in running. Like they're not going to make a dog run and guide if they're not interested in running. And so he did show an interest, and they trained him to run and guide me. So not only can I, ask him to work in Concord or Boston or wherever we go, I can also just put the harness on and go for a run independently. And, that means not needing to coordinate anyone else's schedules. And, it's nice. I can just grab my dog and go. He's a 80-pound yellow lab, and I say that he has the biggest, blockiest head because it is just, when I first met him, I was like, oh my gosh, look at his head.
A lot of compliments.
One of my coworkers says that his paws are like mini snowshoes, that he has really big paws, and he's just a big boy, just a big lab.
Yeah. How old was he when you got him?
I got him the month he turned 2. So I got him April 4th and he turned 2 April 19th. Got
it. So he's not technically working all the time. And I say that very, very much as an uneducated statement, but I pick up on that. Yeah. Just based on looking at the pictures, because, there are times in which, maybe you and Steve and Elwood are out for a winter hike. He's very much not working. Yeah. Right. Well, it kind of looks that way to my untrained sense, but tell us a little bit more about when Elwood would be working, when he wouldn't be working. And I'm just curious if that's a challenge for him to be able to kind of switch it on and off.
So no, it's not a challenge for him. He, I think, does better in his work. He is flawless with his work. I've had to have him redo something maybe, 3 times in the past 5 years of working together. He is such a good boy. But he is working when the harness is on. So his guide dog harness. So when his harness goes on, he gets really serious, still happy. Like he wags his tail and he's very much happy, but he's very alert, very serious, very focused, and not super into other people. Like he won't say hi necessarily to other people. He minds his business, keeps his focus. And so when he's off his harness and either just on a leash or loose, you're totally different. Like your typical happy-go-lucky, I love everybody kind of lab. Playful, goofy. I mean, this dog is so silly, like just his facial expressions, and he's a big goofball. Very much it's a switch for sure.
Yeah. What misconceptions, if there are any, do you think people have when they see working dogs? Or maybe said a different way, what's one of the more difficult things for you and or for Elwood when he is working, and maybe people want to approach him and give him a pet on the head or talk to him, or like what are those challenges like?
So I think people can get the misconception So there's two. So like you said, our dog's always working. Is he always working? When you see a dog that's guiding in a store or something and you don't know anything about him, you're probably like, oh, that's his job. Like that's what he does all the time. I've had people ask, like, does he guide in the house and stuff? And no, he does not. And so so I think that's a misconception. And then just the misconception about how much love and attention he gets. I am really affectionate, like when we're working, but he's like, if we're standing in line, like waiting to check out at a store, for example, I'm always like petting his head, rubbing his ears, telling him he's a good boy. But I think a lot of people think like, wow, these dogs don't have a fun life. Like they're there to serve a purpose. And while that's true, like he is there to, his job comes first and foremost. But I mean, he is so loved and so spoiled. And I think that's a huge misconception, is just how much free time they get and how loved they truly are.
Yeah. Don't you get the sense that he really loves to do what he does?
Oh my gosh, yeah. If I go, you want to go help mama? And I go get his harness, he like dances. He dances, and then like he gets so happy that he'll like curl his whole body and like smack himself in the face with his tail. Yeah, he's so excited when he hears his leash and collar and harness come out.
Got a job to do.
He's right there.
Yeah. I mean, I guess to the unaccustomed or uneducated person, it can look like the dog is a servant. And that's all that's all that they do. And while while serving is a big part of their life, it's not the only part of their life. I mean, truthfully, all people have to do is sort of take a peek at your social media profile, and you see pictures of Elwood, and he's clearly doing his thing.
Lounging. Yeah, I mean, so I worked him a couple miles around town today, and he had a blast. And then when Steve got home, Steve went for a little run and took Elwood, and Elwood was a totally off leash, loose, happy dog.
I love it. Actually, last question as it relates to Elwood. So you said that Elwood is your third dog that you've had. Generally speaking, from a workability standpoint, from a service standpoint, how long do these dogs stay in service typically?
Typically, they'll retire anywhere between 8 years old and 10 years old. My last dog, Otis, who was also a yellow lab, he worked until he was 9. I've had friends whose dogs have worked until 12. Others retire much earlier. And so it all depends on the dog. They're making a choice to work. And so, but yeah, usually it's between 8 years and 10 years old. So we get them when they're around 2. So, 6 to 8 years.
Got it. Actually, another follow-up question. So there must be some overlap then in terms of the dogs that you have, right? I mean, in other words, you might have a retired dog, but at the same time, you have a new service dog.
Yep. So I had Otis for 3.5, almost 4 years. At the same time, I had Elwood. Yep. And so the boys got along great, and yeah,
pretty cool.
Otis could go lay on the couch and kind of laugh at Elwood.
Yeah,
you got to go
like,
work.
Bye, I'll be here.
Have fun.
I know dogs communicate with each other, and
yeah, for sure.
I wonder what some of those stories.
I know if they were swapping guide stories.
Right, for sure they were. Well, Steve, you have a pretty active background yourself. Yeah, tell us a little bit more about it. I mean, you mentioned that you were busy raising your family, and so athletics, endurance sports really became a part of your life. Once your kids were older and out and doing their thing. why did you get involved in endurance activities after your kids were grown?
I've always been active and doing things outside. And it just, I started with the running, and it just kind of grew from there. I started with 5Ks and 10Ks and turkey trots and things like that. Most are just to just kind of get back into shape, wanting to be in shape. And then it just kind of blossomed from there. I got into Seven Sisters and did the ragged 50K, and I've done Loon Mountain and done a lot of the trail races. I really like the trail races, or trail running in general, just because I like being out in the woods and the mountains. And then I started back in with the 48 4,000 footers. Started climbing, trying to accomplish the list. But then that kind of got sidetracked a little bit because it was more, I liked hiking in the northern presidentials. So I started doing those time and time again. And then I met a friend that was a guide for a guide company up in North Conway. And he started talking about, rock climbing and then ice climbing. And so it kind of went in that direction. And then
Steve got inspired.
And then, yes, I was inspired. And then,
thank you. Exactly.
Colorado, the climbing, hiking out there was just incredible. And
You did Mount Baker.
Mount Baker, that was through my friend, the guide from New Hampshire. He does part of the year out in Washington for a company, and back in the Washington area, or Mount Washington area for winter. So I went out and did Mount Baker, and just it keeps going.
Yeah, well, we're all fortunate, I think, to live here in New Hampshire, because there are, for folks that enjoy outdoor activities, we have so many different things right at our disposal. They don't necessarily have to be competitive, although they can be competitive.
That makes it a little bit more exciting, I guess.
Yeah, there is competitive trail running and competitive mountain running. But you don't have to be competitive in order to enjoy the outdoors here in New Hampshire. You mentioned rock climbing and ice climbing. There's certainly no shortage of that here in the state. And then you mentioned the 48 4,000 footers. So here in New Hampshire, we have 48 peaks that are at least 4,000 feet in elevation or higher. It's referred to as the 48 4,000 footers. And here in New Hampshire, for people that like to hike and for people that like to maintain and keep track of lists, there's
a lot of lists for hiking.
There are a lot of lists. Yes, there's 48 4,000 footers. There's 52 with a view. There's the New England highest. There's in other words, there's no shortage of things to keep us busy.
Always something to climb.
Always something to climb. Always something for us to enjoy. So, Steve, actually, how many of the New Hampshire 48 4,000 footers do you have left?
I was afraid you were going to ask.
Be not afraid.
It's 30, isn't it?
I think it's in the low 30s. I've got to kind of revise my list. I've moved this past summer and I lost my master list, and I've got a few to add to it, but I'm right around 32 or 34. Yeah,
32 or 34 done, or 32 or 34 remaining?
No, 32, 34 done.
Gotcha. Okay.
But like I said, I got trapped in the northern presidentials just because I liked it so much more. I just started every time I went north. That's where you go. I was in the northern presidentials.
So you've got 12, 13, 14 left, something like that. And how long have you been working on this project?
It's been probably 5 years now, 4
Yeah.
years.
Yeah. Well, I've been working on the New Hampshire 48 4,000 footers since 1996.
Well, I'm not that far out. How
And
many have you got?
I still have 4 to go. So
Oh, yeah.
it has taken me quite
We
a
should
long
talk
time.
after the show, and maybe we could.
I'm sure. I mean, I know for sure I've got Owl's Head, Isolation, and the 2 tri-pyramids, North Tri-Pyramid and South
Yeah.
Tri-Pyramid. So,
Yeah.
so if you've got Owl's Head, Isolation, of the tri-pyramids to do, my wife and I, Karen, we're going to be looking for some companies. Turns out
Isolation.
Yeah. I have not done Isolation. I've done the tri-pyramids.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Long story long. I think we have saved the worst 4 for. I've saved the worst 4 for last. Steve,
you're fun because you can kind of, it's not really any sort of a time limit. It's when you
that's
get around to doing it.
Absolutely true, and you can absolutely take your time for sure.
Yeah.
Steve, you've undergone quite a physical transformation in the last year or so. Again, doing my social media research and just scrolling through some photos. And it's funny because when did we see each other? This past summer at
August
at Haley Heinrich's wedding. It was August. Thank you, Jessie. And of course, you looked amazing then, of course, but that's kind of how I remembered you looking until I was scrolling through some photos and I realized, wow. You've undergone a transformation. Tell us about that.
Well, it all started back a long time ago when someone, we won't mention any names, asked if I was interested in a full Ironman. Well, I guess it started when it was the half Iron. It was the White Mountains.
Yeah, it was an Olympic. So I needed a guide. So in June of 21, I needed a guide. My guide had backed out like 10 days before
the
race.
Call.
And so I called, I was like, all right, let me see if Steve will do it. So he had been kayaking alongside me while I was swimming, and we had been biking and running together, but he wasn't doing any swimming. But I called him and I'm like, hey, do you want to try a triathlon? Because we had chatted about it a little bit. And he was like, sure, like no hesitation, just
how
sure.
Hard can that be?
And I'm like, okay. So he got in the water, swam about 600 yards. I thought he was going to drown. He went back out a couple more times, and then we did the White Mountain Triathlon, and it was the choppiest, coldest water that lake could have possibly been. But he was a champ. He did it, and
it was brutal.
Stuck with it.
It was brutal. I thought I was going to die.
And So
and then
after that,
we decided on the Ironman Chattanooga, and that's where it all kind of began. And then it was, the swimming. I was big in swimming from a long time ago, and bicycling. Obviously growing up, kids riding bikes, but when you start riding 100-mile bike rides and all of the swimming, it transformed you. But that was part of the fun was, all of the training.
Would you be willing to share how much weight you lost?
I would say probably between maybe 30 pounds up to, I'd say 30. I was like 180 and I was down to like 150, 155.
Yeah. Pretty amazing.
In that area.
Yeah, pretty amazing. Well, the pictures are the pictures are really quite striking. You both put in a lot of work for sure. So we didn't really talk about how the two of you met. We're going to talk about your work together in a moment. But how did the two of you meet? That question, by the way, was my wife's question. I was talking to her. I was talking to her before the show, and she said, "Make sure you ask them how they met." I'm like, "Oh, okay."
Okay, go ahead.
That wasn't on my list. But so, how did the two of you meet?
So I was a runner, obviously. And it was someone through Acidotic that put out an email, and I forget who it was. And it was me and someone else, and asked I know you two live in the New London area. There's a woman that is looking for a guide. She's blind. Is anyone interested? And I kind of looked at the email and thought to myself, I'm like, why not? So I answered the email and I came over to where she was living at the time. I pull in the driveway, get out of the truck and introduce myself. And she walks over with the tether and she's like, okay, you ready? I said, and I almost ran her into a telephone pole that day. Honestly, I was doing my best to watching the sidewalk, and I wasn't sure. I didn't know what I was doing.
I was coaching you as we went.
Yeah, but you knew the route too, because you had run it so many times, and that's another thing that impressed me was that. How did she know that sidewalk was there? I'm like, how did she know we were turning left? How did we know it? But after so many times, it just becomes so ingrained in running that route time and time again. And that's So that's how we met, and then it just took off from there.
Jesse, do you remember the story differently than that?
No.
She claims she saw the telephone pole.
I did. I saw, because the sidewalks around here are really narrow, and so whenever we're running on a sidewalk, we have to basically be like touching arms, or else one of us is either falling off the curb or running into bushes and telephone poles. And so,
fair.
No, that's pretty accurate.
All right. Well, I want to get into that that dynamic of the two of you, and what does it mean to be guided? What makes a good guide? What some of the things, Steve, that you've learned. Let's get into that. But let me set it up this way. So. Together, you both have completed numerous triathlons and also running specific events, along with, as Jessie mentioned, downhill skiing and Nordic skiing, and I think one of you mentioned open water swimming or things that you've done. But recently, and again, you alluded to this, I think earlier. Recently, you both completed Ironman Chattanooga in Tennessee. Now, Steve, you had mentioned to me that before you met Jessie, that you hadn't thought about being a triathlete. Now you're an Ironman triathlete, Steve. What changed your mind?
I guess it was the Olympic that we did, the first that we did. It was just fascinating, I guess. Just combining, listening to Jess. She had done. What, 2 others before?
I've done a couple of halves.
Yeah, so I mean, just hearing about those and the training and the bricks, and it just,
training for a triathlon's intense. So he wanted to jump on board the crazy train.
It's life changing. It really is. It's really exciting. It was a lot of fun.
Yeah, and I suspect that. As much as any other endurance sport or endurance sports, there's a tremendous sense of accomplishment when you finish a triathlon, right? Whether it's your first sprint triathlon or it's an Olympic distance or you move up to the half iron or even a full iron.
That Ironman finish line was unreal.
I was going to say just
that's amazing.
Yeah, so let's talk about that actually.
The events themselves.
Yeah. I watched some of the videos of the two of you finishing Ironman Chattanooga. Jessie, tell us about Ironman Chattanooga. What was that like? Take us through the preparation for it. How long did you guys train for it? And then tell us a little bit about how race day went.
So as far as the training, it was interesting. I was thinking about this earlier. So I had never I started, my first triathlon was during COVID. It was September. It was the Sunapee Triathlon. It was the only one that happened that year around here, put on by Millennium Running. And so I did that in September of 2020. And from then until Ironman Chatty this year, or in 2022, I hadn't taken a season off or a break. And so I just kept slowly building. And then last I don't know, October maybe of 21, I reached out to my good friend Kenny Niddle, who is a coach down in Pennsylvania, and he's also a guide for blind athletes. And I was like, it might be helpful to have a coach that understands that dynamic and stuff. And so I reached out to him and I said, hey, would you consider coaching? And he said, absolutely. And he created a plan. We worked together up through Chattanooga, and he was, I don't want to say he's the reason I was successful, but like having a coach is so helpful just to keep you on track and accountable, and just someone to talk through challenges with and successes with, and
accountability.
Yeah. And someone who like we were scheduled to do 2 20-mile runs, like back-to-back weekends, one of them being after an 100-mile bike ride. But the first 20-mile run, I had hurt my hip like after the run. And so I was reaching out to him and I'm like, I don't know if I should do this. Like, should I do the next 20-mile run? And he was like, no, don't push yourself. You're too close to the race. Like, let yourself heal. And I was like, yeah, but am I setting myself up for failure, like by not doing this? And he was able to talk me through just that process of like, no, the second 20-miler was more for like your confidence, and just so you had confidence in yourself. And so just someone to talk through things with.
He just wanted to punish you.
just someone to talk through things with. And so that was really helpful. Training was intense. There were weekends we were biking all day Saturday, and then doing 100-mile bike ride Saturday, and then Sunday running 20 miles. And it is true. I've never experienced, like, you hear triathletes when they say you have to put your life on the back burner, and you really do. Like, my family went on the back burner. Steve's family went on the back burner. Like, it was training. Right. Eat, sleep, breathe, train.
Didn't have dinner until like 9, 10 o'clock.
Yeah, like we got in this habit, this schedule, just because of our training schedule. We were eating dinner at like 8:30
right
every night, and it's like, great, and now we're gonna go to bed on after eating. And so, but it was fun. We kept it fun by going new places. We'd go bike on the seacoast or run on the seacoast, or travel to different places just to do different routes. There's a bike race called the Prouty in New Hampshire, and so we rode. Yeah, so in Hanover, New Hampshire. And so like we rode that bike route, not during the race, but we just took their route and did it. And so, we kept it interesting. We definitely had fun with it, but there were definitely days that I was like, oh, why am I doing this?
Yeah, it's long and arduous for sure.
It's grueling, but it's so fun. Like, you kind of flip-flop back and forth between the two.
When it all ends, you're searching for what to do.
Yeah, you have a lot of time.
So going into the event then, were you confident? Did you feel like, yeah, this is something we're going to be able to do?
Yeah, I did. So going into it, I would tell people I'm confident, but I have a healthy respect for the distance. I wasn't scared of it. Like, I didn't fear it, but I was like, I definitely respect the intensity. It also helped that we trained on hills. Like, it's New Hampshire, so everywhere has hills. And Chattanooga is surprisingly hilly. Like, the course is hilly. It's definitely not flat. So I think our landscape helped in training too.
So Steve, before you met Jessie, had you ever guided a blind athlete?
I had not. No, I had not. No,
things I suspect
catch me to the tether was the first time.
Things I suspect probably improved after that first tethering experience, you running her into the telephone pole, or she would have ditched you probably as soon as you got back from the run to find another guide.
Thanks for coming.
Yep. Your services will not be needed any longer. Jessie, technically, what does it mean to be guided? We've been using that term, to be guided. What does that mean?
So there's a lot of variables depending on how much vision someone has, but for me, I use a bicep tether, so it's kind of like a bungee material that goes around. It loops around my bicep, and then there's a strip of cloth, and then it goes around
bungee material.
And then it goes around his bicep. And it allows you, by attaching up on your arm versus hand holding something, it allows you to swing your arm naturally. Some people will use waist tethers. And that's exactly what it sounds like, just something that goes around your waists rather than your arms. And other people will use a handheld, they'll just hold like a string or a rope or something to connect them. And so the level of information that the guide is providing really depends on the athlete. Like I said earlier, I tell my guides to pretend like I can't see anything, because I'd rather them warn me about a pothole rather than them assuming that I can see the pothole.
Right.
We're going left. We're going
right. And so it's a lot of just cues, like anything that you would want to know. Like, all right, we're coming to the top of the hill is a good one. Because it's like, instead of me having to be like, are we done with this dang hill yet? It's more like him just being like, okay,
station.
Like we're halfway up the hill, like, just cues like that. Or, we're going to gradually go left, gradually go right, or, sharp left, sharp right. So kind of verbal cueing where we're going. And then stuff like at aid stations, he'll help grab waters or grab bananas or whatever, just to make it faster.
Steve, what are some things that you've learned over your time guiding Jessie?
It's I don't really think there's much like what she has said. You're just giving cues as to we're coming up on a car. This up here, I can see the end. I can see, why are we walking? Well, it's because we're going up a very steep hill, and everyone else is pretty much walking too.
Right.
The aid station, what's there? You kind of just get in your head. They've got pretzels, they've got pickles, they've got, name off everything they've got. She'll tell me what she wants, and then, off we go. But
I think you've learned to be more vocal. Like, when Steve's not a big chatter when he runs, like he doesn't like talking. Mm-hmm. And when we first, and I still have to remind him sometimes, like sometimes
what are we doing?
Yeah, like sometimes he'll just stop talking, but he'll like stop moving, or like he'll just suddenly turn left or right or something. And I'm like, what the heck is going on? And he's like, oh yeah. Like, but I think you've learned to be more descriptive and vocal.
And it's more so on the bike, because I mean, running, you're at the tether, you're a foot apart basically. So I mean, she has a good idea of where we're going. Besides the basic things, it's not all that much. On the bike, I think I can give her better. We're coming up on a hill. She'll feel it downshift, and we're about to head up a hill. Or why are we going so fast? Or it's where was it in Chattanooga with the one that we slipped on the?
Oh, we hit Chattanooga has these weird rumble strips in the middle of their roads instead of just on either side, and so we were trying to pass someone, and they kind of pushed us over, and so we
almost went over.
We hit the rumble strip.
We were going very fast, and she said, "What was that?" I'm like, "Nothing." Nothing. Just pedal. And then, at the end, we had a flat tire a mile from the end, and she never told me.
Yeah, I didn't tell him.
Feel it. We hit
because I knew he'd want to stop and like fix it, and I was like, no, it's fine. we're just done.
Basic stuff that you'd think that when someone can't see, you just kind of explain what's coming up. And
I've had a lot of guides because I have a decent network of runners in the area that I run with, and they say it's pretty intuitive. Like, none of them have been like, wow, that was really hard. They all say it's pretty intuitive, pretty easy.
So I want to ask about trust, and I want to get both of your perspectives. Steve, I'll start with you. How big of a factor do you think trust is in this athlete guide relationship?
with the running, I mean, yeah, I would think that she's putting a lot of trust into my decisions and where we're headed, or the conditions, or dangerous situations like heavy traffic on the side of a road. Are we far enough to the side, or the breakdown lane wide enough? But I think probably one of the biggest things that really kind of got me, and I don't know if I ever said anything to her, but with the rock climbing, here I am belaying her. Well, we had belayed and climbed and climbed and belayed. And one time she said, I want to learn how to belay. And I was like, but it was me putting my trust in her. I'm like thinking to myself, well, she has always trusted me. So
And
I guess here we go. So,
and I haven't dropped you.
No, she has not. But I mean, it's role reversal pretty much with the trust thing. And, I hadn't really even thought about like on the bike there's been a couple of times where you've been like, wow, that was a good save. We went into some dirt and off the pavement. Almost tipped over, and we didn't. But
Steve is a great bike handler.
Yeah,
in our first triathlon, he had like 2 waters and 2 bananas in his hands, and he's keeping the bike up. And I'm like, how are you doing that? Like, give me some of this stuff.
But that's where I think I noticed it the most.
Yeah.
The ice climbing and rock climbing. It's like, here I've always, she's put her trust in me. Well, I guess it's time for me to put my trust in her.
Yeah, it's a really good point. And Jessie, what about from your perspective? How big of a factor is trust for you?
Yeah, I mean, it's huge. I've had guides that make little mistakes. Like I've rolled my ankles a couple times. Nothing bad. But I mean, it's trust in the sense of, when you're running, you can get really hurt really easy. Breaking an ankle or
I forgot about skiing,
things like that, and. Like on the bike, Steve and I go, like we have a hill around here and we call it 55 mile an hour hill because the bike gets so fast going down it. And, that's huge trust because I have no control over the bike.
Neither do I, but I don't say anything.
But it's just, he's in control and you have to just have faith in your guide. There has been a couple times where with other guides, I've been like, I'm not really so sure. Like,
and I think it's also with time.
Yeah.
After doing it so many times, the trust is there.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I would imagine the greater the risk associated with the activity,
exactly.
the greater the level of trust that's required in order for the athlete and guide relationship to work. And
I'm much more picky about my triathlon guides than my running guides. Like I kind of pretty much say anybody can run and guide, but for triathlons, it's a little.
You're coming out of the water.
Yeah, it's a little more intense, I'd say, just because of the bike.
For sure. Jessie, as it relates to guides, do's and don'ts. What for folks that might be interested in becoming a guide or guiding a blind athlete? What are some things for guides to keep in mind in terms of do's and don'ts?
Well, there's actually a cool website. I'm going to put a plug in for a website. So
please, yes.
It's called UnitedInStride.
Thank you.
.com. And it's a place where you can make a profile and say if you're sighted or blind and what your preferences are, what your running pace is, what your if you're a triathlete or a runner or just a biker, like whatever sports you're into. And then you kind of just match up with people in your local area. And so like when I go on vacation, I'll look up like, oh, are there any guides in, Clearwater Beach, Florida, or whatever. Like I'll just, wherever I'm going, it's like, oh, are there any guides there? I bet there are. And so I'll find people like that.
Very cool.
Good way to network.
Yeah, it's really cool. So as far as like, there's no real hard and fast like don'ts because everybody is different. As far as like what information they need, I'd say like go in with an open mind and like wanting to have fun, and just ask your athlete, like, what do you need? Like, what cues do you want? Like, and just kind of gather information as far as like how much vision they have, what can they see, and just kind of keep that in open dialogue. I guess the least helpful thing to do would just be like, we're running along and then you go, look out. It's like, what? So vague things like that. Like, don't be vague. Don't just scream, look out, or things like that. Like, that wouldn't be very helpful.
Yeah.
An idea of what you're going into.
But, just have an open dialogue and, yeah.
Exactly.
Well, I think you made a really good point about asking your athlete about the extent of their vision. To me, that would seem like a difficult question for a sighted individual to ask their blind athlete.
Yeah,
but
some people find it awkward, but it's not like it's.
Yeah.
It would be like it again. It's not usually a big deal because you need to know the information.
And it's something they've been dealing
with.
So
like, you're never going to ask an athlete. You're not, as a guide, if you show up to guide an athlete and you say, hey, can you tell me about their vision? They're not going to look at you and go, none of your business.
Yeah, no. It's a good.
It's a very open dialogue. And
yeah. It's a good point. But and I appreciate you mentioning that it would be an awkward question to ask, because I feel like it would. Steve, what about from your perspective? Now that you've been guiding for a little while, if someone approached you and said, Steve, I'm interested in being a guide, what's your experience been like? What should I know? What advice would you share about being a guide as you are one yourself?
Listen to what they have to say, what they're comfortable with, the type of tether they want to use. It's what type of running. Is it like trail, flat, whatever it might be. There's all sorts of. We just did a cross-country ski clinic up in Craftsbury, Vermont, and there was like a 2-hour session where Sam, one of the instructors, he had a group come in and was doing, guiding for Nordic skiing. And there were probably 8 or 10 people that were interested. So I'm sure it's the same with the running. There's got to be groups or even
there is,
places that, like the place you just mentioned.
Yeah. Now, Steve, when you're guiding Jessie, is she running your pace or are you running her pace?
That's one thing that's actually nice about being a guide, is that you've got each other to, one, have conversation with, 2, to provide motivation, because some days you just don't feel like doing it, and come on, we got to get this done, and you do it.
Rule of thumb is the guide should be a stronger athlete, because I'm asking the guide to
just guide.
Like, it's my race, and that sounds really selfish, but it's like, it's my race. Like, I need you there to help me be successful. And so, like, if you run a 10-minute mile, but I'm trying to do, a 2-hour half marathon, like, that's not going to work. And so they say that if you're a guide, your worst day should fit my best day so that you don't mess up my race. That's kind of rule of thumb.
And with the swimming, I'm not supposed to be in front.
He's not supposed to be ahead of me.
I've got to slow down.
Which he's a faster swimmer than me, so he has to watch.
I'm constantly looking to my left to see that she's ahead of me, because they'll disqualify you. They'll pull you out if I'm ahead of her.
Yeah, and I'm glad that you mentioned that, because I want to talk a little bit more about the swimming. In fact, let's talk a little bit about Ironman. We can talk about races in general and their openness to people with disabilities, Jessie, your perspective on that. But let's start with Ironman, because we've been talking about Ironman. Obviously, Ironman, either makes accommodation for or welcomes athletes with disabilities.
Yeah,
I want to go
absolutely.
first.
Yeah,
So
they do.
Talk about that a little bit.
What's interesting about Ironman is each race isn't directed by the same director, and so like you're dealing with different people for each race. Like it's a company, but then you're dealing with different people, and so
right,
directors.
There's been a couple of times, not many, but like I think 2 races where I had to like email 2 or 3 times to be like, hey, I've emailed you. I'm asking for, like, I'm telling you my guide needs to register. We can't race until we get this link. Like, can you help us out? But that's usually they'll answer and be like, oh, sorry, like, here you go. Usually they're super responsive and super welcoming. And yeah, it's a really, really good atmosphere. I will say there's not a ton of, so there's a physically challenged division
PC
for Ironman races. And so like sometimes I'm the only PC female and it's like, I would like some competition. And so that's kind of a drag. Just because, you know, if I was competing in the F25 to 30, 29 category, there would be a ton of people. And I'll just take my numbers and kind of weasel my way in to see like where I would have been, but it's not, you know, that's not official.
Well, no, but why do you think that is? Why do you think there aren't as many physically challenged individuals entering these types of events? Why is that?
I think you're seeing more.
Yeah, I think as time goes on, there will be more. I think people are just realizing that there is, you know, that they can do it. I think a lot of people focus on, or are, you know, when you're raised being told that you know, don't do that, honey, you're going to get hurt. That's dangerous. Don't do that. Like, I'll get it. Like, you know, you get this fear. Whereas if you have somebody who's like, no, go give it a shot. Like, go try it.
Your parents really.
Yeah. And so I think people are learning to be more engaged in the endurance community. But I don't know. There's just, you know, I don't know. I wish I could grow it for sure.
Well, I mean, I think just by your example, you work to do that. Mm-hmm. Do you think Ironman, the company, the organization, has any responsibility to promote the sport to the physically challenged, or is that not their business? I mean, do they?
I don't think they have to, but like it would be nice if they would. Like it would go above and beyond what they need to do, but it would be really nice if they did. Like I know Seven Sisters Trail Race just advertised and let like what was it, women register early or something, and so like just little perks like that for, you know, like make it a community, make it like, hey, let's go do this race in, you know, Chattanooga, Tennessee, and like let's try to get as many PC athletes as we can, kind of thing. Like just I think they could help to grow the community for sure. Yeah. Whether it's their place, doesn't have to be, but
well, nice. I mean, they certainly have the resources.
Yeah.
You know, it's one of those things where, you know, you can do good by doing well, right? In other words, Ironman is a very successful company. They could do a lot for the physically challenged by promoting their sport to that group and to that community. Yeah. They don't have to,
right.
But they certainly could be through their lead.
Exactly.
They likely would engage, inspire, motivate other race organizations to do the same. I mean, I think, you know, as a race director myself, I think that is one of our greatest challenges, that is how do we reach that category of athlete. How do we create opportunity?
Yeah.
How do we welcome these athletes, into this greater endurance community? I mean, I think as race directors, we all have that responsibility.
Yeah.
Because the truth is, Jessie, that there are others like you out there, or there are other people out there that are just waiting for the opportunity. They haven't yet got into the sport, but they would gladly get into the sport.
Yeah.
If there were more opportunities.
Yeah, and there are opportunities popping up, not necessarily within Ironman, but like Challenged Athletes Foundation, Team Catapult. Like there are different organizations that offer, and like they're specifically for physically challenged athletes. And so, they'll do like a triathlon camp or, a tandem bike camp and things like that.
Some of the camps that you guys do.
Yeah, so there's things out there, but they're just, it's just advertising and getting the word out and growing.
Well, again, I think both you and Steve are leaders in that regard. Getting back to Ironman. So, Ironman has a physically challenged category, right? That's what you said.
Yep.
So what are the rules, as it relates to, athletes being guided at a Ironman distance triathlon? I'm curious about swim specific rules, bike specific rules, and run specific rules. What can you share?
So the swim rules is he has to be, so the tether's probably, I don't know, like 2 or 3 feet long, like between us.
It attaches at the waist.
And it attaches, at the waist and the thigh. And so he can't be ahead of me because I don't want him pulling me faster. And that's really easy to do in the water. And so he has to make sure, he has to look at my reach and make sure that his reach isn't going above me.
Okay.
And other than that, for the swim, I don't really think there's... Yeah, I think that's the big one, is just don't get ahead of your athlete.
Yeah. All right. Follow-up question to that, if I may. Either one of you can answer. So, so the tether you said is about 2 feet or so, right?
Yeah.
I mean, the swim start in most triathlons, particularly if it's a mass swim start, can be described as utter chaos.
Yeah, that's right. That's accurate.
It's like a cage fight in the water, right?
Pretty much, yeah.
You've got dozens of people swimming over the top of you, clawing, grabbing, pulling.
And they put the PC class out in front of all of that.
Okay, so we start right behind the pros, and so I usually tell my guide, like, let's get over to a side, like let's pick a side and just let the faster people go by us.
I try and stay to one side as best I can.
Yeah.
There has been an instance where, like, what race was it? It wasn't the full Ironman. I think it was Musselman, which is a half iron in Geneva, New York. And I think it was that race where there was one swimmer that was insistent that he or she needed to swim between us, and so I finally had to grab their head and be like, go around, like, you can't go between us, you're gonna get caught in this rope.
I don't suggest trying to swim between us. He's got a mean right hook.
But that can be dangerous for the athlete and us, know. So we try to stay to a side
maybe it's a silly question, but do either of you wear a different color swim cap than other participants in order to identify the fact that the two of you are tethered together in the water?
Some races do and some don't.
Okay.
I've gotten put in a swim cap with my age group, and then others the PC has their own swim cap. Okay.
Steve, technical question, swim related question for you. When you're guiding in the water, when you breathe, are you breathing to the side that your athlete is swimming on so that you can keep an eye on your athlete? Yes. And if that's the case, do you have a preferred side that that you would have Jessie swim on, or is it up to her? How do you decide what side she swims on?
It was up to her, and I was always on the right, so I just kind of got used to her being on the left.
Okay.
And yes, I'm looking in the water, and as I come up, and then you're following the markers, the buoys. So you're looking up, you're looking to your left, and you're trying to stay behind her the whole time. So
Got it.
I typically would tell my guides. So Chattanooga was interesting because it was a downriver swim, and so it was like a straight shot. But usually it's like a triangle or a rectangle, whatever the shape is. Usually you're turning around buoys, and so I'll typically tell my guide I'm going to go on the inside so that when they're swimming, when they want to turn us,
I just swim over the top of her.
They can like crowd me, and I'll naturally just kind of move away because I'm like, oh, why are you swimming on me?
Got it. And Jessie, for you, technical swim question. What feedback, if any, do you get from the tether on your guide, or are you also breathing and sighting your guide, or what feedback are you getting either from the tether or from the side that you're breathing on in terms of your guide?
So I typically bilateral breathe, so every other I'll like switch sides. And so with the tether, I don't care what side my guide is on. And with the tether, I think honestly, the best part of the tether in the water is just keeping us together, because otherwise we would get so lost in the madness. And then just the turning, because he doesn't pick his head up and say like, okay, we need to turn right. Like he'll just either pull me right or kind of, like I said, swim over me to make me turn.
Yeah. Well, it's a good point.
So he's using his body to turn.
Right. Rather than verbal cueing, because you're in the water, your face is in the water, obviously, other than when you're breathing, but it's virtually impossible to try to have a conversation with somebody when you're actually swimming, when you're both swimming in the water. So, so it's less verbal communication, more Steve using his body to guide you around a buoy, and to keep you swimming in a straight line. And straight line swimming is really important in triathlon, obviously, because the fastest distance between 2 points is a straight line, right? So. So the better you get at straight line swimming, the faster you end up in pulling off those swim lanes. All right, so out of the water, out of the water you guys get, and transition through transition 1, and then on to the bike. Obviously, you're on a tandem bike. Tell us more about that tandem bike. What kind of bike is it? How specialized is this bike?
Well, her name is Rocket.
Rocket, all right.
And
for good reason.
It's Santana is the brand. And so
Santana.
We recently, well, I guess a year and a half ago now, we put ETAP SRAM, like electronic shifting on. It is so nice. What a difference. I had never known between manual shifting and electronic. And so we upgraded that, and the bike is made out of a lot of carbon, some aluminum. It's pretty light. As far as tandems go, it's light. But like if you're used to a regular bike and you pick it up, you're like, whoa, it's kind of heavy. But I would guess it's like 25 pounds maybe.
Yeah, okay.
It's super light.
Yeah. And so, that's the only requirement for Ironman for the bike part is you, as a blind athlete, you have to be on a tandem.
Okay. All right. And this bike has aero bars.
Yep.
In other words, you both can be in aero. You both can be in that aero position.
Yeah.
That's one of my things is I will say, we're going into aero.
Yeah. He'll say like ready to go into aero.
Okay.
Stop pedaling.
So that Jessie doesn't end up being like a sail, right?
Right.
And, or like an anchor. So how much? So Jessie, you have no quote unquote control on the bike.
I have no brakes and no control over the gears.
Right. You're the engine.
Yeah, so our pedals are connected, so that like, when my right foot is going forward, so is his.
Okay.
And so he can't stop pedaling without me knowing. No, but he, like, I can tell, like, if I'm putting in more or less power. And so that's like a silent communication. Like, if I start kicking in more power, he's like, okay, she wants to go faster.
Okay.
Or if he's pulling back, sometimes I'll say to him, why are you pulling back? And other times I'm like, oh, he's, we're going to slow down or whatever. So it's, there are silent cues.
Yeah. And Steve, what about the obvious verbal cues? What types of information or feedback are you giving Jessie when the two of you are on the bike?
It's pretty simple. We've got a hill ahead, go into aero. We can take a break, stop pedaling, lift your butt off the seat and take a break for a second. We're heading downhill. We're coming up on someone. We're going to pass. We got to, give it some. We got to get by this person. It's
typically you don't stand when you're on a tandem just because it's so wobbly. Mm-hmm. But if you are on a huge hill and like you need to stand, it's a countdown. Like he'll be like, we're going to stand in 3, 2, 1 up so that we're both in sync.
Got it.
Because you don't want to start high speed wobbling.
Nope. Steve, how much feedback do you attempt to get from her in terms of how she's feeling in order to gauge her energy levels, her fatigue? Are you asking her about that during the race?
I can, like, what mile are we on? We're on to the second loop. It's really not that much. It's kind of get on and pedal.
He checks in. He'll be like, how you feeling?
Yeah.
Kind of a heads up for you, Chris, because I know you guys are talking about working together. He's terrible at fueling. And so I'll say to him, like,
good to know.
Eat. Like,
yeah.
It's time to eat. Like, I was his, like, alarm clock.
Yeah. Okay.
You got water back here.
So
he can reach up and grab my water and hand it to me.
I can grab his snacks and stuff because they're in his back. Mm-hmm. So I'll like grab his snacks for him.
So Jessie, you're doing as much checking in with Steve as Steve is checking in with you, right?
Yeah. I think it's strengths and weaknesses of each team. I've had guides who have reminded me to eat because they actually have it set on their watch. It depends on who each team is a little bit different.
Yeah. And then you're transitioning in transition 2 and putting on your running shoes and off you guys go. You mentioned before the shorter bicep tether.
Yep.
In terms of Ironman, the company, what rules, if any, are there for the athlete and guide on the run?
It's funny. I don't know. Because I don't know. I don't think you have to be tethered for the run, but maybe you do. Because I need the tether, so I don't pay attention to like if they're required or not. Because some athletes, like I have a couple of friends who are legally blind, but they have like tunnel vision, it's called, and so like they can see like a decent amount, but like a tiny spot in their eye, and so like they can like follow somebody. So I honestly don't know.
Got it. Okay. So, but suffice to say, there's no requirement to be tethered.
I don't think so.
Yeah. And there are different types of tethers as you described before, right? There's a bicep tether. You could be tethered at the waist. You could be holding a piece of rope to tether together. So any number of different ways right to do that. And then sort of to wrap up the conversation about Tennessee Chattanooga, you mentioned how amazing the finish was. Talk a little bit more about both of you. Talk a little bit more about what it was like to finish.
Oh my gosh! So it's a 2-loop run course, and so you run over this bridge and then you turn right to go into the finish, or you turn left to go do your second loop. And so
back out again.
So we did our second loop and we're on the bridge and we're headed over to turn, we're on the bridge, and you can hear every time you're on the bridge, you can hear them saying like, John Smith, you're an Ironman. And so it's like, I want to be there. And so the second time we were on the bridge, I said, are you ready to kick it into gear? Like, because I said, leave a little in the tank because we need to look like we're flying on the finish line. And so,
look at me.
So when we were on the bridge, I don't know how, maybe like 0.2 miles left. Like it was pretty short. But I was like, are you ready? And he's like, no. Like, let's wait till we get to the straightaway. Like, let's wait till we get a little closer. And I'm like, okay, I guess so. So then we turned into the straightaway, and like as soon as we turned, I started like booking it, and he was like, wait, not yet. And I'm like, yes, let's go. Like I was like pulling, I was like, let's go. And so it was so cool. So there was so many people. It's the most people I've ever seen at a finish line, like just screaming their heads off, like cheering and jumping and celebrating you. And then Ironman has, because it's dark when we finished, but Ironman has these lights, and so it's lit up and it's this red carpet, and you're coming in and you feel like the whole world is looking at you for like 1 second. It's really cool. And they're like cheering for you, like they're screaming for you. And then you hear the guy on the speaker say your name and that you're an Ironman, and it's like, oh my God, finally, like I'm done. I did it.
And then you sign up for another run.
And then you figure out what you're doing next.
Yeah. Steve, what about for you? Was that one of the coolest finish lines you've ever experienced?
Yes, it was. It really was. I mean, it's just, it's everything has added up and you've made it. And that was a brutal, we will add that the swim, I mean, that was a very fast swim. You're swimming in the river downstream.
There's
so
a current.
it's incredibly fast swim. You're like a minute and 20 second or something.
Yeah, something fast.
You're getting a very fast swim in, but when we got out of the water, it began to downpour and it rained. The whole bike ride was just downpouring rain. And then once we got off the bike, the sun came out and it got very hot. So it was like, all right. At the end of each one, not necessarily the swim, but at the end of the bike, it was like, all right, we're done. With that. I just want to finish this.
Yeah.
But,
it was really cool though, because our coach Kenny was there, and my mom, and so seeing them around the course was really fun. And then the finish line video you've probably seen, Chris, but it's pinned to the top of my Facebook feed, and it's Kenny taking a video, and he's screaming his head off, and it's the best. So just knowing there in the whole atmosphere, the whole
city of Chattanooga is really, I mean, from the swim on, you're swimming underneath the bridges in the river. People are lined up on the tops of the bridges, screaming
at 8 a.m.
and it's just a lot of excitement.
It's very
people are like cool. Having parties on the side of the road, like just cheering for you and
it's very
playing
cool.
music and
pretty exciting.
Ironman
accomplishment. You realize that you've just done something that not many people do.
Totally. There's no question about that.
It was pretty cool.
What's next for the two of you in terms of races or events? You want to share that?
So I'm so undecided. I still don't know. I'd like to do a couple of half irons this summer.
Scheduled.
I'd like to do a couple halves, and then I think just want to focus on just having fun with like running with my friends and hiking and rock climbing. Like there's so much that, like I said earlier, that got put on the back burner. Like he and I would talk about like, oh, it would be so nice to rock climb today, and it's like, oh well, too bad we have a workout to do.
Ironman Arizona.
And so there's a lot of that I want to do, of just hiking and rock climbing and I don't know, lounging around on my stand-up paddleboard on the lake. But I definitely do want to do two or three half irons. And then I definitely will do another Ironman, whether it's this year, next year, or 5 years. I don't know.
Got it.
And a big long run somewhere in there.
Yes, a big long run. Yes, yeah.
For him, not me.
Yeah, well, that's what I'm going to say. Yeah, I think Steve and you and I are going to be talking about that pretty soon.
Yes.
Well, very cool.
The bucket list.
Look, I want to finish with a fun segment of my show that I like to call 3 random questions. Okay. Right. So I've got three random questions. Now, typically, these podcasts are me and one guest. Occasionally I have 2 guests. And so I'm going to change things up a little bit with my 3 random questions. I do have 3 random questions. Jessie, I'm going to ask you the first one. Steve, I'll ask you the second one.
Yep.
And then the third question, I'm going to ask you both to answer it. Okay. All right. Okay. Now, if you'll do this for me though, will you confirm for the listener that you have not received these questions in advance?
No, I have not.
Okay. So
I'm curious to hear what they are.
Okay. Truly random. Okay. All right.
This is getting interesting.
Yeah. This is always fun. It gives me an opportunity to see my guest think on their feet. Okay. Jessie, you're first. First random question for you, Jessie, is this. Jessie, what's your best advice for making the world a better place?
Open-mindedness. Be open-minded. Because I think a lot of times we get stuck in our ways, or, we just aren't curious. Like, just be curious and open-minded and be willing to learn.
Boy, I love that. I talk a lot about curiosity and learning as a mechanism to facilitate growth, right, and development, because that's really kind of what we're all striving for, isn't it? We want to continue to grow and to develop.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I think if you're open-minded and curious and willing to learn, you're probably not going to argue or fight about much, because you'll learn perspectives and learn values and views, and
you too will do an Ironman.
Yeah, I think that would make things better.
I really like that answer. Steve, here's your question.
Yeah.
Steve, what's the most important thing you've learned in your life thus far?
About what?
Right. About anything. What's the most important thing you've learned in your life thus far?
That you're not really promised what's going to be around tomorrow. You've really got to kind of enjoy everything. I'm a big believer in just do something. Don't be afraid of it. I mean, to a degree, but you're not guaranteed that tomorrow's going to be there.
Yeah, well, that's coming from a guy who's been skydiving, so I guess
you're right. True.
I guess you're a living example of
shark
that.
Cage.
Steve.
I've been in a shark cage once.
Right. What's
that's another podcast.
What's the expression? The reason that they call today the present is that it is truly a gift.
It really is, and
right.
as you live, you realize that.
All right, third
be
question.
Happy with what you've got.
I think that's also a really important lesson too.
Mm-hmm.
All right, last question is a question that I'll have each of you answer separately. Okay. So last random question for you, Steve. We'll start with you this time. Steve, bucket list trip destination.
Oh boy.
Now, it doesn't have to be race, although that might be a bonus if you could travel to this destination and do a race, but not necessarily. Steve, bucket list trip destination.
Oh boy, I've got so many.
I know, right? I'm pinning you down to just give me one, Steve. Yeah. And then Jessie, I'll ask you the same question.
It would probably be like an Ironman in possibly New Zealand, or like a longer.
They've got one.
A longer run.
Yeah.
In the same. New Zealand is always been fascinating. I think it's that would be a lot of fun, I think.
Beautiful. Sounds
Mhm.
tropical,
Yeah.
and beachy, and warm.
Yeah.
I like all of that right now. Jessie, same question to you. Bucket list trip destination.
Well, he stole mine because I've always wanted to go to New Zealand. But if I had to pick a different one too, I think, Japan would be really cool just because it's so different. Like their culture is so different, the food, the vibe, and there's so much like I have a Facebook friend who just went skiing on some incredible places in Japan, and I'm like, who would think like I'm gonna go to Japan for a skiing trip? Like, I don't know. I feel like there's just so much to Japan that we have no idea, or I have no idea, and so that would be really cool.
Yeah, certainly a much different culture than our culture.
If I may, real quick.
Yeah,
we are filling one of those, and it would be Montana here in a couple of weeks. So that would always been a destination. We're cross-country skiing in Yellowstone. So
how cool.
And I just booked a snowmobile tour too.
How cool is that?
On the list too. So.
Montana is
Where
definitely.
Where would yours be, Chris?
Well, that's a good question. You just turned it around on me. Well, I think that now that my wife and I have a reason to visit, I think it would be a European tour, starting but probably not ending in Germany.
That would be cool.
My wife's younger brother now lives in Germany, and
that's awesome.
he and his lady friend have invited us over. So I'd love to do a European.
Take them up on that.
Yeah,
I'd love to stay in Europe. Isn't a bad,
right? Yeah, exactly. Maybe tour Europe via train. Brussels and Paris and Berlin, and that would be a bucket list for me. I've only traveled outside of the United States once, a few years ago when we went to Olympic National Park in Washington. We took a ferry over to British Columbia. So I've been to Canada once, but outside of that, I've not traveled outside of the United States, or I should say, I've not traveled outside of North America. I really would love to travel to Europe.
That would be nice.
And do some active sightseeing. Well, Jessie and Steve, thank you so much for sharing your stories. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having us. This was so much fun.
We could have done a show exclusively about Elwood. Guide dogs have always fascinated me. Jessie and Steve are a great team. I'm so impressed by both of them. Jessie's positive attitude is entirely contagious. And as a guide, Steve's selflessness is incredibly admirable. They're really easy to root for. Well, once again, you've been listening to the Eat Half, Walk Double podcast. If you enjoyed what you heard, please circle back to the homepage and click the follow or subscribe button to stay up to date with all the new content. And of course, if you really enjoyed the show, please consider sharing it with your friends. I'll be posting some supporting media on my Twitter account at Coach Chris J. Dunn and the show's Facebook page at Eat Half, Walk Double, so make sure to check that out. And lastly, remember, the secret to living well and longer is to eat half, walk double, laugh triple, and love without measure. Until next time.